both you guys worked on the campaign for a guy named Dennis Kucinich. You're both in Ohio, and I saw those results coming in. We actually streamed live shortly as those results were coming in. When I saw the margin between Cordray and Kucinich, I thought to myself, no frickin' way. No frickin' way.
Yeah.
So you guys have some information to share. What's going on?
Well, so I was on the campaign from day one. I was the events and scheduling coordinator, and Jesse came on. He actually moved from Texas to be in Ohio to work on Dennis's campaign.
What part of Texas, Jesse?
Dallas.
All right, that's more leavable than say Austin, but all right, fair enough.
Yeah, it is.
Dallas is cool. Don't get me wrong, but
no, I like Dallas. Yeah, but Austin, I think I love Austin.
Yeah, that'd be a tough place to leave. All right, so please continue.
Okay, so yeah, so he moved here to be a field organizer, and so just living life on the ground, we did not see the kind of reaction that the polls seem to show. The the disparity is much larger than we could expect based on the kind of response that we were getting from folks around the state to both Dennis and Tara. Tara Mosley Samples was Dennis's running mate. And when it came down to election day, and Jesse was on the ground a lot more on this than I was, but we saw a lot of fishy things going on in the polls. And then we kind of look back and see a number of things. And there's this sort of aggregate, increasing aggregate pieces of just thumbs on scales and fishy numbers going on in the polls and stuff like that, that it was kind of a slow.
Go into some detail about that first.
Okay. Well, I'd say, actually, I'll let you go about what happened on election day.
Well, first I'll talk about last month. There was a poll that came out from Fallon Research that was showing Cordray with like a double lead over Kucinich. Mm-hmm. And I actually tweeted at that organization asking them for the methodology in the poll and everything else. And they told me, we can't give that to you. That's the property of the client. So the client that actually commissioned the poll was a right-wing activist group that literally had in its explanation that it wanted to find where the donors should spend their money. And that's what the poll was about. So I was like, this poll makes no sense. So I did that research. And when they told me they couldn't even give us the methodology, I was like, this poll's pretty much fake.
Well, that's the thing. Either the poll itself is completely bogus, the questions are leading, and it's just like really inconclusive, not useful data, or the poll tells you something totally different, and you see somebody in the media, whatever the outlet may be, cherry pick certain statistics from that poll and use it to reach this bogus conclusion that the poll didn't even really indicate. You always see one of those two things happen. Recently on this show, we talked about a poll that said Biden's the 2020 front runner. And we looked into the poll and it's like, well, they only screen people in one state. They only screen so many people that identify as Democrats. And out of those people, a couple of them were like, it was just, they totally just pulled out this random part of the poll and said, oh, this is what the poll meant. And that was what it was. It wasn't about who's your favorite contender for 2020 even. So it was just a totally ridiculous conclusion from a poll that they just cherry picked. So you usually see one of those two things going on. Either the data itself completely sucks or the data is fine, but they try to leap to this conclusion that's not there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and, you know, the polls were weird. You know, we had one poll where we had climbed up, we tied, and then we had the poll that Jesse just spoke about where we like dropped 9, 10, 12 points. It was crazy in the span of a month, and that just didn't seem to us plausible. But there was a number of other things besides just the number play that we noticed on election day. But the release of the way they did the Assad attack on Dennis, and finding the group, that was it was a peace organization that paid him a $20,000 speaking fee to go to London, and he gave a talk on peace. They were a pro-Syria group, but I guess there were a few pro-Assad members in there, and they exploited that, and they did it very strategically. It was very well placed, because that was sort of like, you know, their smoking gun. Dennis has taken $20,000 that he didn't report, and it's from, you know, and they can start beefing up a sort of terrorist narrative, which is ridiculous for that he knows any platform he's ever spoken. It's always about peace without military intervention to the best of our ability. But they released that shortly after early voting had begun. And so what that does is it scares people, because it did a lot for the Democratic base voters. That was a hard hit. And then they went out and cast their votes. Well, once you cast your vote, you don't have time to get the information out there to correct the record. Yeah, I feel that in a certain way, that was one area that we could have been a little more aggressive and handled better. But that one was a really big voter hit for us, because, like I said, this came from a number of different directions. It wasn't just, you know, they went in and rigged the polls and there's a smoking gun and we can point fingers at a particular person. It was a lot more like, you know, how 2016 worked for Bernie Sanders, where these were the small little incremental bits of rigging, where you can't really point as a particular finger. And if you can't point like a very specific finger, it's much harder to fight legally or anything like that.
So wait, let me ask you this. Is there actual foul play going on at the polls themselves? Was there actual, like, votes were mismanaged, something similar to what Tim Canova went through? Are you seeing any of that? Or is this just a matter of Cordray's smear campaign, which was a smear campaign and was was terrible propaganda, but I guess it was effective. Like, is that just the conclusion here?
Well, we can make some pretty like certain speculation that ODP had a direct hand in how a lot of this worked, even though while they played the front of being you know, that they weren't getting into it. But you could see where certain monies were being funneled. And the county parties, a lot of the county parties, especially the rural parties, where they got them to endorse Cordray. And once they endorse Cordray, then all of these voters are getting a slate. So you have all these other counties going in with, you know, checkmark slates and vote for Cordray and that. So there was definitely some thumbs on scales, but okay. I think their broadest methodology, though, was the smear campaign.
Okay, so like, but as of right now, just to be totally transparent and fair here, there's no evidence of actual cheating or rigging, other than just your typical the establishment smearing the progressive and not totally being neutral in a primary process the way they're supposed to be.
Well, I'll let Josie speak mostly to that, because he's actually looked into this a lot, but there is some at least anecdotal evidence that there was some direct rigging of the actual election on the ground when it happened.
Okay, yeah, so like in what way?
I can go over some of them.
Okay.
So some things that I personally saw or witnessed was that obviously they do debate rigging. There's that as well. I was at the Cleveland Heights debate on Saturday, April 21st. And the person who was moderating actually tried to take over the event and be blatantly pro-Cordray. But they weren't allowed to do that because there was another function of the Democratic Party that was more progressive there too. But she let him end almost every time, and she let him give the final closing statement, because the whole debate he was basically saying, me too, I agree with everything Dennis said, but I'm the only one who can be elected. So she was helping facilitate that so he could respond. But a couple other things. They were refusing to give Democratic voters a Democratic primary ballot at like polling locations. So when they made it obvious they wanted to vote for Dennis and they wanted a Democratic ballot, they would be given a regular nonpartisan ballot that just has the issues on it. And when they said, that's not what I want to vote for Dennis, or I want to vote for in the Democratic primary, they still wouldn't get a Democratic primary ballot. They would be given the nonpartisan ballot instead. That's one thing that I saw personally. Another thing was the results were pretty uniform across the state, almost as if they weren't legitimate. It was kind of weird because we saw all across the state, the percentages were nearly the same, except for in Cleveland, obviously, where Dennis Kucinich was a congressman for a while. So those numbers were a little higher, but the rest of them seemed almost like you plug a number into an equation and this is the number it gives you. And it's pretty much, I found that to be bizarre. But a couple other instances that I didn't see, but other close members of our team saw, there was a guy at the gunning precinct, that's where I stood all day, that was giving us information. But one of our members was asking for information on the results. And he gave her some crazy sheet. And when she was like, this is not what I asked for at all, it doesn't show me the information, he's like, okay, we'll get you the right sheet. He goes into the back room with the other workers there. They quickly pack up and rush to leave. And then when she tries to stop them and says, you didn't give me anything that I asked for, he's like, oh, we already packed up and we're leaving. So she couldn't get the results from that precinct because he's just like, no, we're out.
So this was a member of your campaign asking for specific results, and that was denied to her.
Right.
Yes.
In Ohio, they post base numbers of who's voted. Actually, they print all the names of who's voted. It's so that campaigns can target like last-minute phone calls, and they do it 3 times. So she was trying to get the final tape on that, and yeah, they shut her down and then said we're closed. Actually, the day before our last day of early voting, I don't know how many precincts, if it wasn't all of them, because in early voting you go to your board of elections. They did a hard close at 2 o'clock. Like they literally closed the doors and they didn't close the line and let everybody in line. So they were turning numbers of, we don't know how many, but there were a number of people that were turned away at the last day of early voting.
Dozens at just one board of elections where 2 of our people were at.
Mm-hmm. So this is just, what's interesting here is that we see this on the micro level within the Democratic Party, as a whole in the nation. When voter turnout is lowest, that's when Republicans do better. So here you have it on a more micro level within the party. When voter turnout is lowest, the corporate Democrat does better, because it seems like this is typical voter suppression tactics. They're trying to prohibit people from coming to the polls, probably because they were worried about your guys' ground game. Is that a fair assessment?
Oh, no, that's exactly it. I mean, if you think about it, like I said earlier, I think the Assad really hit Dennis hard, but we only had 22% of the vote show up. And the Republicans kicked our ass by about well over 100,000 votes. So that to me is really, really scary. Now, we've seen a couple polls now that Cordray is unfortunately the nominee that has him up, but most everywhere has Mike DeWine kicking his ass. So it looks like it's going to be Republicans Ohio for at least another 4 years. But
no, yeah, there's no way Cordray is going to beat the Republican. I'd be shocked. Yeah, I'd be shocked if he beat the Republican.
But I think the Democrats definitely did not want a large base to turn out, and so I think more than anything, it was the Assad bit that kind of and they ended up giving up and not going. But because to be beat the way we were, it was like what,
23 or something to like 64 or something like that.
Yeah,
around 40 points. I mean, when I was on the ground in Cleveland with a lot of my colleagues, we almost never heard anyone say the name Cordray. Almost everybody we talked to was either "Don't talk to us, we don't care," or "Dennis Kucinich is our favorite. I met him here. I knew him before you were born." All these other different things that the voters would tell us. And there was a lot of excitement on the ground for Kucinich. So,
well, and that was just in Cleveland, because we had this going on across the state. And so, yeah, it's disappointing, but I think at the same time, of course, this is all speculation on to what extent ODP, the Ohio Democratic Party, did or didn't put their finger on the scale, is that they wanted a lower turnout so that they could manufacture a 40% defeat, so that optically it looks like that our so-called movement was crushed, so that they could sweep the progressives off the table and move heavily forward with their corporate agenda. If it had been a closer margin, then we would have had, optically a much more, it would have looked like a bigger thing that we had done. I still think that we've got that movement there, and none of us are giving up on it, but it would have been nice to have Dennis at the helm.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. That was a clip from Get Your News On with Ron, the world's first viewer-curated streaming news show. What does that mean? That means I log on to a stream and people tweet me articles over on Twitter at Ron Placone, or they use our Reddit subsection, which is just Get Your News On with Ron over on Reddit. And that's how we build the show. I'm seeing all these articles for the first time. We are literally getting our news on together. Follow me on Twitter at Ron Placone so you can participate. And this show streams live every Tuesday through Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So please do tune in. If you want to support this show, you can do so over on patreon.com/Ron Placone, where for as low as $1 a month, you get access to exclusive podcasts every week, exclusive videos, free tickets to shows when I'm performing in your town, and more for as low as $1 a month. Please do consider it. Thank you so much for your support. This has been Get Your News On with Ron.